down on a dangerous mission to rescue fellow American soldiers. Returning to the States, he anguishes over the fate of the crew member he thought he left behind. For Larry Kern, the fog of war lasted more than 30 years. July 21st, 1970, Kern, a 22-year-old helicopter pilot with the elite Ghost Riders from the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. Their mission, as told in a new History Channel documentary, to rescue Americans under attack at a landing zone near the notorious fire base Ripcord, a U.S. outpost surrounded by North Vietnamese. The fire is intense. Kern says rocket-propelled grenades hit his Huey helicopter. The chopper goes down. According to the documentary, Kern, his co-pilot, and crew chief escaped. But Kern says his gunner, Mac McFarland, was pinned underneath the fallen aircraft. Before they can do anything about it, U.S. ground troops rush them out of the zone. Kern thinks his gunner is dead. After being evacuated, he says he learned McFarland was alive, but in bad shape.
It was probably the worst feeling I've had in my life, because he was my responsibility.
March 1971. Kern leaves Vietnam not knowing the fate of Mac McFarland. For more than 30 years, Kern says he lives with guilt and depression, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. At one point, he contemplated suicide. Through a slow recovery, he could not get Mac McFarland out of his mind. He searches for Mac for about 2 years with no luck. Then producers of the History Channel program Operation Reunion learn about Kern's story. They put him in touch with a private investigator. June 2002, the fate of Larry Kern's gunner, a man whose real first name he hadn't even known, is revealed. And on that cliffhanger, we bring you to Larry Kern live from San Diego. Larry, tell us about the meeting.
Well, it's phenomenal, because not only did I get to see Mac for the first time in 32 years, but also my crew chief from that day, Ned Epps, and about 30 other Ghost Riders I hadn't seen in 32 years.
We're looking at a still picture. To see the moving version, you have to watch the documentary. You can almost feel the emotion just as well in that still picture there. Can you recall what was going through your mind?
Well, listening to what you just showed kind of brought some of that back. It was incredible. It was a feeling of relief, the fact that I now know where he is today, and actually a lot of the other guys. One of the things about this, the History Channel doing this reunion show, Operation Reunion, I'm hoping that when people see this on Sunday, they're going to, maybe a few Ghost Riders will see it, and we'll find some of our guys we're still searching for, like I was, and maybe other men who haven't found, or haven't been trying to find, people they served with, might find that a thing to do.
I'm sure there's so many stories just like yours out there, and I've got to ask you a question. Have you thought much about this? If you hadn't had this reunion, if you hadn't had that closure and that ability to know what happened, where would that have left you?
Still wondering, still searching. I've been lucky enough to find a lot of the guys over the internet with the help of my daughter about 2 years ago, actually almost 3 years ago now. Once I found them, I tried for 2 years to find McFarland and actually Epps, my crew chief from that time too. And the guys, every once in a while I would send an email out, does anybody know? Check your old records, see if you can find a Social Security number, and it never happened. And then the History Channel was looking for stories like this, and Robert Owens, Goober, the man who runs our website, told me to throw him a kiss. Thank Goob. Anyhow, he told them about what was going on with me, and they contacted me, and this is how this all came about.
What can you try to explain this bond that is forged, you know, some 30 years later? Is there a unique connection there?
You know, the amazing thing is, for 28 of those years, the last thing I wanted to do was talk to anybody about Vietnam or even find these men. And what I found out at that reunion is not just from McFarland and Epps, but everybody else, all the other guys. I was Crash, we have Goober, we have Itty Bitty, Barfy. All of us had call signs, and that's why we couldn't remember. I couldn't remember his real name, his first name. You just knew call signs.
Yeah.
But what I found out is you see these guys after 32 years, and within a few minutes they would morph right in front of your face. and you'd remember them at 19, 20, 21, 22, and you'd remember all these other things, and found out what a really strong bond there is.
Yeah.
It's not having to call them every day, but to know they're out there is very important. And I'm hoping that this History Channel reunion, the Operation Reunion, will allow other men and their families, who a lot of families will probably know that their husbands and fathers have this problem, that maybe it might be good for them to find those people from their past, because these are brothers. We're brothers of a different kind. It's not blood. It's a tie that's almost as strong, if not stronger in many ways. And you don't know that until you find it.
Great words to begin a Memorial Day weekend. Crash, give our best to Itty Bitty and Goob and all the rest of them.
Barfy.
And Barfy. And
CW.
And on all the others, we wish you a happy Memorial Day weekend, and remembering those who you can't connect with as well. We appreciate you being with us, Larry Kern.
Thank you very much.
Back with our web question of the day, results.
Die. So all these guys suffer.
I've never talked to a soul about Vietnam for 28 years.
One common desire.
They were closer than brothers.
I want to know that he's well, that he's alive.
A History Channel special event, Operation Reunion. Next on the History Channel.
Military combat. Every battle, an encounter with fear, chaos, and devastation. For some, the haunting images just won't go away until they can face their darkest hour. These are the stories of men searching to make peace with the past. The objective? To find fellow soldiers who can help them. The mission? July 21st, 1970. More than 300,000 American troops are fighting the war in Vietnam. U.S. soldiers face a determined enemy in unfamiliar jungle terrain. 22-year-old Larry Kern is a helicopter pilot on his first tour of duty in Vietnam. His mission is to rescue American soldiers under heavy artillery fire. On approach to the landing zone, rocket-propelled grenades hit Kern's Huey helicopter. He struggles to land, but loses control of the craft. As it crashes, Kern's gunner is pinned under the chopper. The last time Kern sees his crewman, the young soldier is in critical condition.
I asked them, how is he? And they said he's got some serious injuries. And I said, is he gonna survive? And they said, well, we don't know yet.
It's been more than 30 years since that day, but Larry Kern remains plagued by guilt, feeling somehow responsible for events beyond his control. He wants to know what happened to his injured crewman, a man he knows only by his last name, McFarland, and his nickname, Mac.
It was probably the worst feeling I've had in my life, because he was my responsibility.
Larry Kern has suffered from severe depression for 30 years. It's a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD.
PTSD is a psychiatric disorder in which a person is exposed to a traumatic event and experiences that event with horror, fear, or helplessness, and then develops certain symptoms in response to the event. Virtually anybody who's exposed to trauma may develop post-traumatic stress disorder.
Kern's recovery could be helped by finding McFarland. For almost 2 years, he's been searching, but with no luck. Now, there may be help from a private investigator in New Jersey named Jimmy Messis, an expert at finding missing GIs. Operation Reunion connects Kern with the investigator.
There was almost a desperation in his in his voice and his personality that he really needed to find the other soldiers so that he could have closure what was bothering him as a Vietnam vet.
Nice to meet you. How are you? How was your flight?
Fine. It was okay. So, what do I have for you? A lot of this stuff has to do with just what happened to our situation. That's me. Young, no gray hair. I mean, this is what I've had to go from.
Messis's job won't be easy. Kern knows almost nothing about McFarland's background. He's even uncertain about the correct spelling of his name.
I need a chance to talk to this man. I need a chance to, even if it's for 5 minutes, just to hear his voice, ask him how he's been.
And I'll ask you a lot of questions about that individual because I want you to try to remember, maybe go back in time a little bit.
In 1970, 22-year-old Larry Kern is a pilot with the Ghost Riders, the elite helicopter unit of the 101st Airborne Division.
We would fly in food, we would fly in ammunition, we would take out injured and wounded, we would put in fresh troops.
We had a reputation that it didn't matter how dark it was or how bad the weather was or how hot the fire was. If you really needed to be pulled out, you called on the Ghost Riders.
Like most of the soldiers in Vietnam, they're barely adults. Larry Kern is an art student when he's drafted in 1969. Within a year, he's stationed at Camp Evans in South Vietnam. In the summer of 1970, pilot Larry Kern and the Ghost Riders are flying daily missions, supplying the troops at Firebase Ripcord in the mountains above the A Shau Valley.
From the time the base was open, it was always a hot area. In other words, when you went around there, you were probably going to get shot at.
It was very isolated. We put them in helicopter, and the only way out was for us to take them out in helicopters.
Every time somebody said you had to go to Ripcord that day, it was, you were stressed a little. It was horrific for the fellows on the ground, so you just did your best to get in and get out.
The troops at Ripcord are trying to destroy North Vietnamese supply routes in the A Shau Valley. By July, Ripcord is surrounded by the enemy. On the morning of July 21st, the Ghost Riders are on a mission to rescue troops under attack on a landing zone near Firebase Ripcord. Larry Kern's crew consists of co-pilot James Weasel Saunders, crew chief Ned Epps, and gunner Mac McFarland. Kern is piloting chopper number 4 in the line of 15 Huey helicopters.
The troops on the ground were being wiped out. They've been killed. And so our job was to go in and get them.
You gotta get us out of here.
When I turned on the ground frequency, there was the man on the radio was frantic.
You gotta find us right now.
And he was screaming they were going to get overrun.
It was the most intense opposition that I faced in Vietnam. There was continuous fire. It was like an artillery barrage going off all the time. Rockets, small arms fire.
As Larry Kern heads down to the LZ, the chopper ahead of him is still on the ground, overloaded with soldiers. Kern is forced to slow down and wait for the other chopper to take off.
And that's when things started going bad. The minute I nosed forward, there was this sound like a bucket of pebbles being thrown on a tin roof. And we took all kinds of hits.
Kern turns back to look at his crew. The front half of McFarland's helmet has been blown off. With his M60 shot out, McFarland uses his handgun. The enemy opens up with anti-aircraft fire.
When those hit, it was the feeling of a 15, 20-pound sledgehammer hitting the aircraft. We were in the kill zone. My best chance was to break off, and we turned, did 180, and we're heading back towards Camp Evans.
Shot 4! We've been hit pretty bad! Wounded crewman! I'm heading back!
And then, A frantic voice crackles over Kern's radio.
When a Huey catches on fire, you don't have much time to get to the ground. It was my worst fear.
Flames and smoke are shooting from the back of the chopper.
Now, the only way to stop a fuel generator fire is to turn the engines off. Now, we're out, now over triple canopy jungle and mountains. A couple of the other pilots who were behind me that were watching us then were coming over the radio.
I'm heading back to the LZ.
Only one thing is on Kern's mind. Can he make it back to the landing zone? July 21st, 1970.
Chuck 4.
Helicopter pilot Larry Kern and his crew are attempting to rescue troops under siege in the mountains of South Vietnam. But the mission has gone bad. His chopper, hit by enemy artillery, is on fire.
We're losing power.
Kern struggles to stay in the air.
I could feel it, and the aircraft was getting really sluggish. You could hear the sound in the engine. When I faced that LZ again, it started all over again. The 51 calibers were hitting us almost nonstop. Epps was firing his weapon like crazy.
I knew everybody on that helicopter, and I knew they were going down. You're just kind of deep down inside. You're saying a prayer for them, hoping they're going to make it out there. It's God, you hope they make it.
Kern tries to control the chopper. A rocket-propelled grenade smashes one of the rotor blades as it touches down.
I could feel the skids touch down, and then, bam, the aircraft flung over on its side and started beating itself to death.
Gunner McFarland is thrown from the craft and pinned under the heavy helicopter.
Come on, help me!
At that moment, I didn't know where anybody was. 51 calibers were still shooting at us. You could see the tracers just going across. They're still shooting at us.
Kern, James Saunders, and Ned Epps managed to climb out of the chopper. A ground soldier orders the crew off the LZ.
Clear the LZ. Where's my gunner?
Kern realizes that McFarland is missing.
I told the guy, our gunner, we got to go get our gunner. And he said...
He's dead.
You know, I said, what do you mean? How do you know that?
He's on the other side. He's dead.
He said, follow me, grab a weapon. We got to get out of here.
Ground troops rush Kern, Epps, and Saunders off the LZ and into the jungle.
And I just looked, and there was a guy there. And I got his M16 in one clip, and I did not get his helmet. I could not look at their faces. It was too overwhelming. And you could smell blood and smoke.
The men take shelter in a nearby foxhole.
There was firing going on all around us. I remember one of us said McFarland, and we all started crying. I failed. That was my feeling, overwhelming feeling that I failed. I should have been a better pilot. John Wayne would have pulled it off, you know. Larry Kern couldn't.
A ground soldier asks Kern to call in the coordinates for an airstrike on the North Vietnamese.
And he says, do you know where those 51 caliber positions were that shot you down?
Where are your coordinates?
And I said, yes, I do.
51 caliber, less than a click north of Peak 605.
I got down, I covered my head, and all hell broke loose. Napalm was coming up from the side of the ridge line. And the air just filled with smoke, the smell, and debris was coming down.
When the airstrike is over, the 51 caliber anti-aircraft guns are silent. The men run back across the landing zone. There, Kern is shocked to see the crew member he thought he'd lost.
My God, he's alive. That's Weasel.
McFarland was on a stretcher. Now, up to this point, I thought he was dead. And there he was on a stretcher, in bad shape, but he was alive.
A chopper brings the men back to Camp Evans. It's here that Kern sees McFarland for the last time.
They knew he had some internal injuries, but they didn't know how serious yet. And they were going to send him out to the hospital ship. The thing that's haunted me all these years is I asked the next day about McFarland, and they said that they had sent him to the ship and they thought he was going to Japan. But I never asked again.
March 27th, 1971. 8 months after the crash, and after hundreds of missions, Chief Warrant Officer Larry Kern returns from Vietnam. He has no idea if his former gunner, McFarland, survived his injuries.
Next thing I know, I'm riding in my parents' car, unemployed, and never talked to a soul about Vietnam for 28 years.
Kern settles in Southern California. He marries, has children, but inside, he lives in a constant state of depression and anxiety, a condition known as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Some of the common symptoms of PTSD are having the event play over and over again like a movie in your head. The experience of nightmares, of poor sleep, of irritability, and difficulty getting close to others.
My memory of everything is in gray, as if it happened to another person. I have a tremor. I shake all the time. I couldn't hold a cup of coffee. I couldn't sleep. I could not relax. Literally never relax.
One person once said that PTSD is too painful to remember and too horrible to forget. And I think that what happens is that people do all they can to push away these terrible events. The cost of that is enormous.
After suffering with PTSD for 26 years, Larry Kern decides life is no longer worth the constant pain.
There was an overwhelming feeling of just plain being exhausted from living.
Kern's plans for suicide are stopped by a fellow vet who recognizes his symptoms and convinces him to call the local veteran center. The counselor at the center asks Kern what seem like several mundane questions. His name, phone number, address.
He says, out of the blue, have you ever contemplated suicide? I fell apart. I literally ended up falling on the floor because I couldn't stand up anymore. And I started crying.
With Kern's breakdown comes intensive therapy for PTSD and the realization that he must track down his helicopter crew before he can move on with his life.
One of my biggest problems, once I started getting better and thinking about Vietnam, was an overwhelming feeling of guilt that I did not follow up on what happened to McFarland.
Kern begins searching the internet, sending emails and contacting military groups. But after almost 2 years of searching, he still had no luck finding McFarland.
I want to know that he's well. I want to know that he has been living a good life. I want to know he's alive.
"30 years after returning from Vietnam, former helicopter pilot Larry Kern begins anxiously searching for a lost member of his crew, his gunner, named McFarland. Kern last saw Mac in 1970, when their helicopter was shot down in Vietnam, and McFarland was pinned onto the craft.
Help! Come on, help me!
In the spring of 2002, Operation Reunion hears about Kern's search.
I'm sure it was.
And puts him in touch with a private investigator named Jimmy Messis.
Larry, let me ask you a question.
He agrees to search for McFarland and his crew chief, Ned Epps.
When I got off the phone with Larry, I knew I had to find these guys, especially McFarland. The most rewarding thing about working on a veteran's case is I'm a veteran. And I feel it's a small way of contributing back to a group of people that I feel camaraderie with. Larry, let me ask you a question. What do you have on Mac?
Almost nothing.
Do we know how to spell his last name? Do you have M-A-C or is it M-C?
I've always thought it was M-A-C because I remember us calling him Mac.
This was a totally unique case. Not only was I trying to find someone with a common last name, I didn't have the first name. I didn't know where he was from. And let's see what databases we can come up with. Well, as you can see, there's quite a few of them with MAC.
After 3 weeks, the investigators' hard work begins to pay off.
I think I found them.
Another Ghost Rider from the 101st Airborne remembers Mac's name, William C.M. McFarland.
One of the Ghost Riders thought that he had heard over the years that McFarland was a police officer in Miami, and then I backtracked public records, which then led me to North Carolina.
Within days, Messis dials a phone number he hopes will connect him with the man Larry Kern is so desperate to find.
Yes, sir. My name is Jimmy Messis. I'm a private investigator. I'm trying to find a William McFarland that at one time was in A Company, 158th Assault Company in Vietnam. Was that you? It wasn't until I actually called the phone and he answered and he identified himself as the McFarland that was in Vietnam that I got that wonderful feeling inside. It is you. Oh, wonderful. Not so much for me that I had succeeded, but that I knew that when I spoke with Larry and I gave him the information, that it would mean so much to him.
I'm glad you had a good flight.
Well, after we spoke, I followed up with your contact, and he had a little bit more information. To make the long story short, I was able to find McFarland. So, Larry, we found him for you. Okay. You're welcome. You're welcome. And he's okay.
Messis has found McFarland, just in time for the Ghost Riders reunion in New Orleans in June of 2002. Larry Kern plans to see Bill McFarland for the first time since they were soldiers in Vietnam.
I hope he doesn't just come up and kind of smack me across the face and how come he crashed? You know, I don't really care how he reacts. All I care about is just count his fingers and his toes and know he's okay.
On June 14th, 2002, Larry Kern waits at the New Orleans airport for McFarland's plane to arrive.
I can't really avoid wondering what's going on through McFarland's mind. This has to have been such a total shock for him. Oh my God.
And then, Kern's 32-year wait to see his lost gunner, Bill McFarland, is over.
Wow, that's been a while. You okay? Yeah, it's been too long.
You're better off today right now.
You look good.
This is, oh my God, you can't believe how good this feels.
Yeah. The emotions before I came here ran the total gamut, from confusion to perhaps even a bit of anger to a bit of excitement, anticipation. I'm not used to people coming up and having felt so close to me 31 years ago, and I'm just having a hard time processing all that right now.
When a veteran is working through a traumatic event, there may be vulnerable feelings that inevitably come up. The fact that somebody cries in processing those kinds of feelings, let's say at a reunion, seems to me to be a healthy response.
As Kern and McFarland head towards the Ghost Riders reunion, they talk non-stop about Vietnam.
How many did you say were there? 8 to 12,000?
Ripcord was surrounded by 9 to 12,000 enemies.
9 to 12,000 enemies shooting at us, and that's a lot of bullets.
We ended up in the bunker on the other side, and they had told us you were dead before we left the LZ. That's when we left, and then we cried.
All that I didn't know, you know. And I'm going, where's my crew? Thinking, my crew's got to be dead because they just wouldn't have left me there like that. The basic element here was, before I talked to Larry, that I was left in a landing zone that was under enemy fire.
Where are you guys? Come on, help!
That's one of the things that's haunted me. The thought that he would think that we left him. And now he understands what happened that day. But for 32 years, he didn't.
At the hotel where the Ghost Rider reunion is taking place, McFarland and Kern embrace their old Army buddies.
Oh, yeah. How are you? Man, oh, man. I was just looking at a picture of you.
The surprise of the day is the arrival of their crew chief, Ned Epps. who private investigator Jimmy Messes located just a few days before the reunion.
There were so many Fs that were in the military. We didn't have an exact date of birth. We didn't know what city or state he was from. Been working on this project for quite a while, and Epps was probably the hardest because we had nothing to go on.
I'm so glad you made it here, man. You doing okay?
Over the weekend, the men discussed their different memories of the 1970 helicopter crash.
I did not know that Epps had come around the helicopter and had pulled my helmet off. So I didn't know that.
And I went towards the skid side. McFarland was pinned, my door gunner, and he was screaming his head off.
Kept screaming, "Get me out of this thing, get me out of this thing." The one soldier that was there went down and took my helmet off, and I looked at the helmet when he threw it down. There was only half a helmet there.
He didn't see who I was.
I'm trying to get you out of here.
And I was talking to him, trying to calm him down. This lieutenant comes over and tells me to get over to the other side.
Hey, no, I'm not leaving my buddy.
I said, well, I can't leave him. He said, no, get over to the other side or you're going to die.
Ground soldiers were able to lift the chopper and free McFarland.
It's resolved a lot of issues that I didn't even know I had been carrying around with for 31 years. I'm now talking to Larry, finding out, you know, what his perspective was, and now I'm talking to Ebbs and hearing his perspective.
3, go!
When you all get together and start talking about what you remember, it ties all those loose ends that didn't make sense. We were on that side of the aircraft. You were over there.
For 3 decades, Larry Kern's memories of Vietnam have been a burden on his soul. He learned that confronting his 1970 helicopter crash with his gunner Bill McFarland was an important step towards recovery. In the end, Larry's determination benefits all the veterans. For every soldier, reconciling the past is an essential step to finding peace in the future.